little bit of the story was given away. I'm obviously, as you guessed, not a native of Texas. I migrated to the United States 1986, $9 to my name. And the first night I watched the Idiot Tube television, I told my bride we're going to make it. She said, why? I said, these people think they have problems. So someone asked me, what motivates you? Hot water. If you haven't had it, it would motivate you. Now, we had running water. If you needed it, you ran and got it. But people always say, how poor were you? We were so poor, we'd go to Kentucky Fried Chicken, lick other people's fingers. So, you know, as they say down home, there's poor and there's poor. We was poor. But, yeah, there's no great drama to the story except an awareness that came very early, which is something I want to posit in your minds as you look at life and the pursuit of it. If you do not give yourself permission to challenge every perception you've ever held dear, life will pass you by as tradition. Just remember, Tevye, Fiddler on the Roof, tradition, tradition, tradition. The Ukrainian milkman suddenly confronted with 4 daughters who made 4 difficult decisions, and he was stuck with tradition. So the question I ask people wherever I go in the world is to ask yourself this lens as you listen to me. Have you arrived where you have because of condition, because of clarity, or because of convenience? Now, America is very interesting as a nation. I tell people, whether your ancestors came on the Mayflower and landed at Plymouth Rock, or whether they came in a Plymouth to Little Rock to work at Mayflower, it doesn't really matter. Wherever you are, there you are. But it's also a strange place. It's the youngest of all civilizations with most of its graces borrowed. America is young. Most of our antiques are plastic. I grew up in India where the Taj Mahal was completed in 1678 after a 38-year project. So you have to understand that there is a whole world out there that's worth. And that's why when migrants come to this country, the reason they seem to prosper. In fact, the statistic is first-generation immigrants to this country are 4 times more likely to have made it as a success in this country than those native-born. Raised in India, my father made me study American history while I was still in India, studying European history and Indian history. And the reason was not so that I would be studious or have some kind of grandiose head knowledge. It was, hey, one day you're going to arrive there, and I want you to have a fighting chance. So I'm going to paint 4 moods for you today: foundation, definition, expansion, conclusion. I've titled this basically, since it's a Patriots Club, and we're talking about it through the evangelical zest, the lens of liberty. But when you look at this journey and you look at all we're going to posit for you, I want you to, one thing, have an open mind. The key in any encounter is that original thought process. Are you willing to allow yourself and your assumptions to be challenged? So let me give you a story. When I first moved to America and I became an assistant to Mr. Ziglar, one day he looked at me and he says, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm right behind you." He said, "How come I'm always having to look for you when I need you?" I said, "Sir, my culture does not allow me to walk next to you. You're the wizard. You're the elderly statesman. My culture does not allow me to walk next to you. It's considered blasphemy." And he looked at me and he says, "I have no clue what your culture is about. Figure it out." And I called my father in India and I said, "How do I do it?" He said, "Son, there are only 3 possibilities." This is simple. There are only 3 possibilities. I either walk next to him, walk behind him, which he didn't like, so that left only one option: walk ahead of him. And for the next 20 years, I walked ahead of him. He saw the back of my head. I took him all over the world. Shortly before he passed, before he was promoted into glory, I was given privilege to go into the hospital room with only the family members. What do you tell your hero as he is lying there? The man who changed your light, switched that light bulb, and gave you that privilege. As he lay there gurgling those sounds of death with impending darkness lying ahead, he opened his eyes briefly, looked at me, looked up at the heavens, and said this, as if as a validation: "Thank you, Lord, for this boy." And that was the moment I realized something very profound. We are not here by accident. There is no random time plus matter plus chance. You are here by divine precedent. However many people are in this room at this time, at this particular moment, was preordained. Long ago, before time began, God already designed that this moment would happen. The fact that I drove here from Dallas is minuscule compared to what the creator of the universe ordained for this evening, because somebody here needs their light switch flipped. I remember when I was in the Georgia Dome and I'd finally made it. I was now speaking to 35,000 people. They put me between Rudy Giuliani and Jimmy Carter just to stop a fight, but they put me between both of them. Mr. Ziglar was in the corner. He says, no longer will you come after me and leave after me. Today you're my equal. We're going to travel the rest of the world together. I'm going to take you to the top. When I got in the limo, I grabbed him and I burst out crying into his arms. I said, how can I ever thank you? And this is genius when he said, son, this is about you. It's not about me. All I did was open one door, but I trained you so well, you ran in looking for light switches. Now go flip light switches around the world. Whatever you learn, are you learning so that you would be a walking encyclopedia, or are you learning to give it away? Emerson said, if you're going to pull me up, you better be on higher ground. Coach Joby Harris said, otherwise the day will come and by the sheer weight of our numbers, we will pull you down. So going back in American history, Daniel Webster said this, if we and our posterity reject religious instruction and authority, violate the principles of eternal ethics, trifle on moral injunction, and recklessly destroy the political constitution that upholds us, no man can say how sudden the catastrophe that will overwhelm us and bury all our glory in profound obscurity. If I were to introduce myself, I'm an Indian by birth, an American by choice, a husband by union, a father by blessing, an evangelist by burden, and a patriot by urgency. We have a republic to save. You are not 100% of the problem, as somebody might say, but you are 100% of the future. So from a generation just above you, let me apologize to you. We blew it, guys. We inherited something far better than what we are leaving you. And I, on behalf of my generation, apologize to you. We stood on the sidelines saying somebody ought to do it, anybody needs to do it, nobody wants to do it, so nobody did it. And here we stand, bickering left and right. I tell people I wasn't born in America, but when I die, I want to be buried in Georgia. At least that way I can continue to vote. This is not about left or right. It's about right and wrong. So the first mood I want to paint for you is foundation. Within the confines of foundation, how do you think? How do you act? I would encourage you strongly to become an investigative journalist if you want the lens of liberty to work for you. The holy grail of journalism at Columbia University always asks the same questions. If you want to be an investigative journalist, you have to ask these questions. Who, what, when, where, why, how? The 5 W's and the H. Who are you? Where do you come from? What makes you laugh? What makes you cry? When are you going to make an impact? Where is your moment of truth going to be? How are you going to be counted? Why should you be counted? Do you want to go through life being counted? Or do you want to grow through life being counted on? 8 billion people on planet Earth, and God in His infinite wisdom made only one you. The mold was broken. There's nobody else with your genetic structure. Now, I come from the most populous country in the world right now, just surpassed China. 1.3 billion people in India. 1/6 the size of America in land size, 4 times the population. In fact, that's why during COVID we had all those cases. There's no place in India you could be 6 feet apart from anybody. In fact, they say there's a woman in India giving birth every second. They're trying to find her and put a stop to it. But abject poverty. Father studied under a streetlight because his parents couldn't afford electricity. Mother was a child bride. That's my beginning. And yet at the age of 75, my father is sitting in a room and I'm doing a lecture and I say, Pop, when your obligations to others finish, your obligations to your dreams remain. Your whole life is ahead of you. Do not take every Tom, Dick, and Harry that comes into the newspaper or the news television on the evening and make them rain on your parade. I was on a newscast the other day and someone said, what do you read? I said, I read the Bible every day, I read the newspaper every day. That way I know what both sides are up to. We're living in a very fickle world. There is no right and wrong anymore. There is no black and white. There is no dark. Everything is relative. Relativism is the biggest crock that has invaded the political and the philosophical lexicon in the last 200 years. A lady will never say, I think I'm relatively pregnant. 9 months from now, she's in for a relative surprise. Some things are right, some things are wrong, some things are yes, some things are no, some things are black, some things are white, some things are good, some things are bad. But where has reason gone? Why have we jettisoned it? Because we have done one thing. We have abdicated and eradicated the moral law, and as a result, we have kicked out the moral lawgiver, replaced him with justice, and where mercy was supposed to be, we have asked man to take over. And now we all wait with bated breath as to what 9 people in black gowns are going to eat for breakfast, because their edict is going to determine how this nation is going to run. And if you go back through the political annals at the very foundation level, that was the least important part, was the legislative. The most important part was Congress. The second was executive. And yet we have hinged all our hopes on the courts. A travesty. That's why, what did Patrick Henry say on the 23rd March in 1775 at the House of Burgesses? The Second Congress met in Richmond, Virginia. How did he say? He says, "Gentlemen cry peace, peace, but there is no peace." That's actually a part of Revelation. Gentlemen cry peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war has already begun. The next gale that will sweep in from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Why stand we here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? For is life so dear, or peace so sweet, that it be purchased at the price of the chains of slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what path others might take, but for me, give me liberty or give me death. And an entire nation marched forward. Well, if you go back in time to 1677 and you read what Benjamin Harrison did in the New England Primer, which is now published by David Barton, he's got the rights for it. They changed the typeface so that modern people can read it. Within the first generation, in the first grade, people were memorizing polysyllabic 6-syllable words. Abomination and desolation. Is it any wonder this nation at that foundational produced the likes of Washington and Monroe, Madison and Adams? You tell me one of that ilk we have produced in the last 50 years. Why? In 1955, the Thomas Jefferson Research Institute said the percentage of morality in our schools was so minuscule it was not even worth counting as a percentile. And here we are almost 70 years later facing that debacle. And that's why when an Enron collapsed and a WorldCom collapsed and Ken Lay was in jail, and they asked him in his interview before he passed away, how does it feel to be accused? He says, they accused me of stealing $600 million. It was nowhere near that much. Relativism. They accused me of stealing $600 million. It was nowhere near that much. After a dollar, it's all stealing. But if you ask children today, even in my own son's school, when he was in school in Texas, I asked this question: is it okay to go into a multiplex and buy one ticket and see multiple movies because you're on the other side? It's fair game. How much do we cede? How much do we give away? I grew up at a different time. But one thing I do know, unless we get back to these basics of asking ourselves not how we're going to make the difference, but why this difference was made in the first place, that we were able to defeat the mighty imperial British army with a ragtag bunch of militiamen who came out of a church and said, if there is war, let it begin here. I remember speaking in Lexington and Concord. How did they do it? Impossible to have been done. The greatest navy at that time. I mean, the advent of the Industrial Revolution. I've been to England many times. You think, they said the sun does not set on the Queen's Empire. That big was that little nation's stronghold on the world. And yet a group of people fought. If you go to Valley Forge, you'll see the history in those snow-capped peaks that these people frostbitten decided because they believed in their leader. Isaiah Potts says one day he was walking by as a member of the opposition party, and he peered through the bushes because he saw a man kneeling, claiming and crying out to the heavens above. It was General George Washington in prayer. And Potts said, that was the day I decided to switch parties, because I realized if a prayer can be that earnest, a God that was listening would honor it, and I needed to be on that side. Just a prayer. That's why Adrian Rogers says, if you don't feel the devil, you're probably walking in the same direction. What did Cotton Mather say? He says, the hypocrisy that we face is not that we are aimless about devotion. It is because our ignorance is actual heresy. It violates a God. And it's not a question of whether America is Judeo-Christian or not. 56 men signed that declaration. 48 had a church affiliation. Some were deists, some were theists. But all of them believed. And that's why that's why Jefferson said, if tyranny is the law, rebellion is our duty. And maybe the rebellion has to come in the form of thought, because other people have seemed to have hijacked it just because they come from erudite schools. What is the foundation that we are fighting? When I look at all these people with net worths of $300 and $400 million, and yet when they came to Congress, they had nothing. And they're telling me how I need to act. Folks, I spent half my year serving the poor, and I don't make anywhere near what these guys make. I just made a deal with God. Give me in 6 months enough to feed my family so I can go feed your sheep. And when you wash the feet of the Maasai warrior and the Kenyan says, you're the first person who has made us both laugh and cry, that's when you realize you're doing something with your life. My good friend Brian Tracy said, if you're incapable of doing anything, at least set yourself on fire. Other people will come to watch you burn. Where is the fire? Why is our motive and our motivation? Motivation is just a motive for action. If you're motivating people so that you'd look good, that's manipulation, and that's what we're doing to ourselves, listening to these knuckleheads. I'm an old school English guy, so I use words to make my point. The opposite of pro is con, so the opposite of progress has got to be Congress. Politics, if you separate the word poly, just means many, and ticks are just blood-sucking creatures. And yet we elect him time and again. People who lie repeatedly. I go to California a lot. I remember I was recently in California. I said, how in God's name can you do this? And we do it on both sides, folks. I'm not giving anybody a pass. If the only goal of getting elected is so that you would get elected again, you are violating your edict to me at a foundational level, which brings me to the second mood, which is definition. It is the rights of the governed. The life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is I give you the privilege by electing you to go defend my sacred honor. It is always the rights of the governed. I'm in charge, not you. And if a lowly immigrant like me could figure it out, why did we drop the ball? We're not supposed to be afraid of them. They are supposed to be afraid of us. But this is in every republic around the world. I come from a republic in India where people are afraid of the politicians. But the man who wrote India's constitution, Dr. B.D. Ambedkar, came from the lowest caste. And yet he was given the definitive task of framing the Constitution that would liberate a people after 200 years of imperial occupation. And in 70 years, we're still struggling to get away from that subservient mindset. Freedom, has, and always will be an ideal. It is not a tactic. My mentor, Mr. Ziglar, had a saying, you can have everything in life you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. But that has to be a philosophy. It cannot be a tactic. You have to do because it's the right thing to do. You have to give because there is joy in giving. Happiness depends on happenings, but joy is undiluted, it's unadulterated, it's pure. Fred Smith said, joy is adequate. Where has the joy gone? You watch any of these television shows or news anchors, and the morosity with which they give, the depravity that is the news, astounds me. Our media has accurately predicted 28 of the last 2 recessions. Doom and gloom. This morning I woke up. Man, Dallas is at a standstill. There are accidents everywhere. If you're smart, don't leave your house. And I'm looking at the map and saying the only way that has no accidents is my route. And I looked at my bride and I said, you know what? If I struggle till here, I'll have free going. She said, I know there's no stopping you. I said, I don't care if there's one person there. I made a commitment. Most people today are as committed as a kamikaze pilot on his 39th mission. And most of you don't know what a kamikaze pilot is, and that's why that joke, I don't know where it was born, but it died right here. Go look it up sometime. They used them in the big war. It was in all the papers. It's fascinating. I was talking to Max, and he talked about his love for history. There is anecdotal evidence that the good guys and good gals really do win. Just today, they passed in Congress where 86 people of one party refused to denounce socialism. And I remember speaking in Chicago to an education board, and a man came weeping to me at the end of it. He was a Romanian who had exiled himself from Romania 30 years ago and got caught up in this woke nonsense. I made a statement: America is the easiest place in the world to be a communist because there's no penalty. And he said, that's what I ran away from. Let me introduce you to Ilona Zimmersman. During the height of the economic collapse of the early 80s in the automobile industry, where Detroit was literally reeling and Congress had to give a bailout to the big three automobile companies, Ilona Zimmersman was voted the #1 real estate salesperson in metropolitan Detroit. Mr. Ziglar happened to be sitting next to her, and he asked her, how did she do it? With her guttural Hungarian accent, she talked about how she escaped communism and clawed through those barbed wires and ran past those minefields to get a glimpse of liberty. She said, everybody sells a house. I sell a piece of the greatest part of planet Earth. America, America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. I remember taking my boy, and he wept because he didn't realize how beneficial it was for him to have been born here, when I took him to the Statue of Liberty and showed him the suitcases that were lined up there, of people who packed their suitcases with newspaper so that they would be allowed passage. When they lift the suitcase, there would be some belongings in it, but it was packed with newspaper to give it weight. Ships lined up in the harbor. Let me in. Emma Lazarus' new Colossus. Keep ancient lands your storied pomp, cried she with silent lips. Send me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these your homeless tempest tossed me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. And today, if you go to the JFK airport, they have erased the wretched refuse of your teeming shore, because apparently that is not politically correct. Political correctness will be the death of this nation, unless you and I, liberty-loving patriots, stand up and say, I'm not going to allow you to hijack the dictionary. I can make vocabulary say whatever I want. If I told my bride, I said, sweetheart, you look like the first day of spring, I'd sound like a romantic. If I told her you look like the last day of a long, hard winter, it's the same day, I'd get a frying pan to the side of my head. You can make vocabulary dance, but why don't we make it dance for good? Why don't we use a lot of four-letter words? Good and fair and hope and nice and kind and best. And take the fight to the streets, because there are only 3 levels to an argument. There's the philosophical mumbo-jumbo. Oh, what would Jesus do? Really? You're going to play that card? If I knew what he would do, would I be talking to you, numbskull? What would Jesus do? How about WWJD? What wouldn't Jesus do? Having this kind of stupid conversation. Philosophical. Oh, you need to love. Who doesn't need to love? You don't like clean air? Of course we like clean air. Why don't you argue for the right instead of the wrong? The philosophical argument is failing on every level because we want this altruistic existence, and it doesn't exist. That's what one great apologist put it this way: there's no such thing as a one-ended stick. If you think that way, you got your feet firmly planted in midair. That's the law of non-contradiction. We're trying to make two things that are exactly opposite have the same relationship. It doesn't work. My pop used to say, you can scratch your nose this way, you can scratch it this way. Either way, you'll get rid of the itch. This way, you'll look like an idiot. Some things are right, some things are wrong. I'm sorry to be terse. I'm 61. In the 30 years since I came here, from hearing Ronald Reagan's Shining City on the Hill speech, to hearing every day about 2 people on opposite sides of the spectrum taking classified documents. That's the news. And I'm thinking, what kind of idiots are these people on both sides? Don't they have a phone? They scan the documents? Why are they carrying these stupid boxes everywhere? How moronic. Oh, they need it for their memoirs. That's what happens when you elect someone who's 120 years old and forgets everything. I mean, this is laughable. It is almost comical. I remember I was in Istanbul, Turkey, and there was a protest on the streets, death to America. And there were many Americans in that protest. And my host said, I said, what's the protest about? Oh, they're really mad about America. I said, man, don't hate America. Most people who don't like her already live there. Where has goodness gone? Where has decency gone? Where has nicety gone? I remember opening a door for a lady in New York, and she says, I can perfectly do it myself. I said, yeah, my mama would slap me upside the head if I didn't try. Chivalry is not dead. I'm from the South. I'm sorry. I'm apologizing to someone for helping them. That's our world. Foundation, the questions. Definition, Francis Schaeffer, how then are we going to live? What are the moods we're going to try to build? What are the levels? Level 1, argument, philosophical. Level 2, media. Level 3, kitchen table. But if you sit at your kitchen table with your kids and give them the argument I gave, you say, Pop, if I talk like you in my school, they're going to laugh me out of the school. Why? The pendulum has already swung. The mood has already shifted. I remember speaking in one school in East Texas, and man, the lady yelled at me. She says, you talk so flippantly. I'm a full-blooded Native American Indian. I said, and? She says, well, you said as far as Indians go, you're the real deal. I said, ma'am, Columbus was looking for me. He found you by mistake. Just be glad he wasn't looking for Turkey. That would be a horrible name to live with for the next 200 years. But even now, people are so frustrated with this. I remember I was in Washington and someone said, hey, what do you think about the football team's name? I said, what football team's name? Oh, the Washington Redskins. I said, wrong Indian. I mean, you're asking me about American Indians naming? I don't have a clue. I come from India. I cannot imagine anybody getting $8 million to throw a ball in India. For $2 million, we'd be the ball. But I said, I have offense with the name. You need to drop the word Washington. That seems more offensive to me. What is the foundation upon which you build? What is the definition you're going to give yourself? I would encourage all of you to read Francis Schaeffer's seminal work, How Then Shall We Live? What is the answer going forward? Is there an end game to this? Is there a checkpoint, Charlie? My friend Vicky Hitchcock from Dallas says, yes, it comes down to 2 statements no matter how old you are. When you finish this journey, there are only 2 statements you can make. I wish I had, or I'm glad I did. I wish I had is one of regret. I'm glad I did is one of possibility. I don't know how it'll end. I don't know when it'll end. But I do believe what Karl Barth said, none of us can go back and make a brand new beginning. But all of us can start now and make a fantastic ending. But the greatest travesty of all is not trying. Which brings me to the third mood, which is expansion. I want to give you a formula on how to move. First, merge the lane of truth. Truth by nature is exclusive. You cannot have 2 things that are true in the opposite of how they are intended. Truth by nature is exclusive, which means this truth would exist regardless of whether man thought about it or not. It would exist outside of man. This is what we call objective truth, right, wrong. Unfortunately, we are living in an era of subjective truth. My heart likes it. My head believes it. Why don't you approve it? And you applaud it. So you and I, raised in good old-fashioned Christian homes, stood by the sideline when they said, hey, all these behaviors are here to stay. So we said, it doesn't concern me. I live in suburbia. I homeschool my kids. No harm, no foul. I'm going to stand on this side. You do what you want. They said, now that you've acknowledged, why don't you accept that it's a way of life? Still doesn't affect me. Go ahead. I accept you. I love you. So now that you've acknowledged and accept, why don't you approve? Well, I may not agree with you, but maybe my friends will, so all you need is 50% of the populace to agree. And the approval happened. But they didn't stop, did they? They came knocking on your door and said, now I need you to applaud. So you and I went from not agreeing to applauding for something we didn't agree on our own watch in one biblical generation. Post-Vietnam, free love, America's cultural soul came home in a body bag. You are unfortunately the recipients of that garbage. The truth that I heard when I was in Hong Kong as a little kid, when my dad was living in South Korea, I'd never been on a plane before. I'd never seen a television before. The year is 1969. In a storefront in Hong Kong, there's a group of people gathering on a small black and white TV. And my father says, history is about to be made. I'm sure glad you're here because we couldn't see this in India. We didn't have TVs there. And the man walks on the moon. And the lunar race is over. Not a bayonet was wielded. Not a bullet was fired. The American flag planted on the moon. And the engineers at NASA, when asked, how did they do that? More computing power in our wristwatch now than was in the Apollo program, probably. Convinced 3 people to get into a crude crucible to be hurled into outer space to make history. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, said the astronaut from Ohio. Little kid, 7 years old, watching it on a black and white TV saying, man, that country conquering the moon, I need to live there. Only to come here and realize slowly but surely the destination that was the home of immigrants. America is the only country in the world that I know of, I've been to 76 of them, that has at least one person from every principality and municipality registered as sovereign by the United Nations. Until you can take me to an embassy or a consulate around the world where there's no line, I will not believe for a second with any waking breath that this is still not the last bastion of freedom and hope. If America dies, my friends, the world goes with it. There will be chaos, the kind of which you will not even imagine. This stupid one world order they're talking about is almost real when you see 200 planes of rich people gathering in a rich locale talking about how to alleviate poverty. If they just didn't go there, they could take care of all the hungry in the world for a year. Billionaires. How then shall we live? What is our expansion? First, merge the lane of truth. Investigate for yourself the truth claims that you believe. Don't listen to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. John Maxwell says the worst kind of people are the neutralizers. At least the enhancers, they excite you. The detractors, they denounce you. But the neutralizers don't add or delete. They just suck air. And unfortunately, we spend a lot of our time with the neutralizers. Have you ever noticed some people will brighten up a whole room by leaving? You've also noticed that people with nothing to do usually want to do it with you. Merge the lane of truth. I wake up every day between 4:30 and 5 and I write something because I want that day to matter. Yesterday ended with last night. Today is the first day of the rest of my life. Positive thinking will not do anything, but it will do everything better than negative thinking will. Every morning, merge the lane of truth. Put into your mind the good, the clean, the pure, the powerful, and the positive. Psychologists have said the first input into your mind is more powerful than the next 5. Don't listen to the negative naysayers of the world. Listen to the optimism and the hope that is within. Merge. Overcome the frame of lies. Merge the lane of truth. Overcome the frame of lies. I mean, I travel a lot, and I can spot moronic behavior a mile away. And I can spot patronizing behavior. It's just lies. They walk up to me, oh, you're from India, aren't you? What gave it away, Sherlock? My doctor is Indian. Do you know him? No, he doesn't know me either. What they're doing, they're dancing on eggshells trying to be politically correct. I need to have a buddy who's Indian too, just to show you I'm not prejudiced. The world was never designed for equality. It was only designed for fairness. Equality is a myth. Fairness says, just let me play the game. Equality says, change the rules so everybody wins. That's communism, if everybody wins and nobody keeps score. But that win is minuscule. Overcome this frame of lies every day. I was standing in the DFW airport behind a celebrity. She had already arrived, had a primetime show. Negligent and ignorant. Ignorance is not a medal. People should stop wearing it. And Hollywood, for some reason, they decide to. She's standing in front of me arguing with the flight attendant about the fact that she's famous and doesn't need to show her ID in a post-9/11 world. And I can only handle ignorance to such a degree before I have what is called a Dhanam intervention moment. I tapped her on the shoulder and I said, ma'am, all of us celebrities need to show our ID. She said, who are you? I said, Gandhi. The flight attendant was excited, bumped me up to first class. See, Eleanor Roosevelt said, if other people have to tell you who you are, you ain't. And yet, they walk around wanting us, this acknowledgement. You know, my introduction to world civilizations when I took over as the director of international operations for a company was a book called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. One page on every country was the only diplomacy I needed. Primary exports, principal imports. Where did their currencies come from? Who were their heroes? How were their revolutions shaped? Are they democratic or not? With that one-page information, I traveled all over the world and set up franchises, being able to respect them. See, we're given this overcoming in the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. The Great Commission is to make disciples. The Great Commandment is to love. If you just love and don't tell them who sent you, you're a nonprofit. If you just witness to them and don't love them, you're irritating. But if you look at two parallel lines, which is what the Great Commission and the Great Commandment are, never expected to meet, but imagine them to be a railway track. If you walk on one railway track, you'll probably lose balance after a couple of feet. Have a buddy on the other track, and you hold hands, you can go a merry mile. You are the bridge between the Great Commission and the Great Commandment so that you can both love and save. Overcome these lies. Now, in 1925, a seminal work was written by E. Stanley Jones, a Methodist missionary who had served in India for many, many years. He died in India in 1970. Time magazine voted him the greatest evangelist of the 20th century. In fact, it was to him that Mahatma Gandhi said those now immortal words, I love your Christ, I don't like your Christians. But in 1925, in that book, Christ of the Indian Road, Mahatma Gandhi was asked the question by E. Stanley Jones, what does Christianity have to do to be a mainline accepted worldview and not considered a white man's import? Now, why is it important? Being an evangelical is not a bad thing if we follow what actually Gandhi suggested, who's actually a Hindu. He says, you want to make an impact? Live like him. Amy Carmichael said, we all profess to be strangers and pilgrims, searching for a land we can call our own. And then settle in the most unstranger-like fashion, exactly as if we were at home and intended to stay as long as we could. I don't believe apostolic miracles have died. Apostolic living surely has. Live like him. Second, love like him. It was central to his nature. Now, this is the foremost Hindu telling the foremost Christian in India. Live like him, love like him. But third and fourth are very, very important. Understand what others believe and don't water down what you believe. None of us have ever gone and read Lenin's manifesto that resulted in Stalin's power, that culminated in a 75-year experiment that decimated populace over 11 time zones. When Stalin was asked, how do you get such great power? He took a chicken and he denuded the bird feather by feather, the most painful thing you can do to it. He put it on the floor and threw some crumbs. And as this bird tried to find warmth in the flannel of his trousers and started following the breadcrumbs, Stalin looked at his associate and said, that's how you do it. First, you inflict unimaginable pain, and then you become the only source of sustenance and warmth. 75 years. They carved up Eastern Europe. The greatest disaster was the treaty at Yalta. I've spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe. Merge, overcome, vocalize the name and the feeling. Vocalize morality. Take a stand for it. Don't go around with this garbage of it's all relative or that depends. I still remember Mr. Ziglar's great de facto answer in Phoenix, Arizona, when we were on a radio show and he had written a book, God's Way is the Best Way. And the young reporter, the whippersnapper, thought he'd get the old man because he was politically correct and the old man wasn't bringing God into the public square. So he looked at Mr. Ziglar, and I was in the room. He said, Mr. Ziglar, what would you be if you weren't Baptist? And Mr. Ziglar, without hesitation, said, I'd be embarrassed, but we're here to talk about my book. And that guy was stunned. With not a word out of him, Mr. Ziglar controlled the interview. Vocalize the name of morality. Right always wins. The conscience does not allow a person to go to bed at night saying, I think I have achieved being crooked. And last, engage in ideas. That's how you move. Merge, overcome, vocalize, engage. Folks, we have to pick a side. They say, you know what? If you put one foot in boiling hot water and the other foot in ice cold water, on average, you're miserable. By the same token, if you see a turtle on a fence post, you can rest assured it didn't get there by itself. And if you have to swallow a frog, you don't want to look at that sucker too long. He ain't going to get no prettier. Get it out of the way. And the last, and then I'll hush and we'll open it up for questions, comments, or snide remarks. So, foundation, definition, expansion, conclusion. How do we know we have won? No matter what you believe in this world, no matter what anybody believes in the world, everybody has to answer the same 4 questions. Origin, where do I come from? Morality, is there a right and a wrong? Purpose, what am I doing here? And destiny, where am I going? Origin, morality, purpose, destiny. The correspondence and the coherence, it gets a little more complicated. Whether it passes the logical test or not is different. But everybody who believes something, from the atheist who is absolutely sure there are no absolutes. I remember I had an atheist challenge me in Raleigh, North Carolina. He says, I'm an atheist. I said, I'll pray for you. He says, you don't understand. I don't believe in God. I said, then it shouldn't bother you if my God doesn't answer. What's your problem? His anger is not that I am defending God or trying to prove God. His anger is I have joy and he doesn't. The other side is only angry that you're happy. They're not angry because you're conservative or you're evangelical. See, when you look at the Christian worldview, G.K. Chesterton puts it best. He says, every other worldview, from atheism to scientism to monotheism to pantheism to panentheism to Islam to Hinduism to Jainism to Sikhism, any isms that E.V. Hill said should be wasms, all of those start with sorrow at the center and an outworking to find some joy. Hinduism starts with karma. Buddhism starts with dukkha, cessation. I should not have any want. I remember arguing or actually having a debate with a Buddhist, and I said, what is the core essence of what you believe? He said, cessation, not having want for anything. I said, who is your de facto leader? He said, the Dalai Lama. I said, why does the Dalai Lama still want Tibet? There's always an extension. But you do it with diplomacy. That's what he believes. I'm not going to denigrate him. He's still a good friend. But the whole concept is origin. They start with that sorrow. G.K. Chesterton said Christianity is the only one that begins with joy at the center and an outworking to conquer the misery through that joy. Another theologian put it this way. He's from Boston College. He said, you know, every worldview has penance, effort, work to get to the top of the mountain where God is. Christianity is the only one where God says, you're not good enough to get to the top of the mountain on your own. Yet you're not bad enough for me to leave you in the valley of despair. I'm going to do something which nobody else did. I'm going to become man and come off the mountain. Such a contrast, such a sweet difference. Do you radiate that fragrance of authenticity? Do you radiate that aroma of belief? That's when we'll win. That's when I get invited into some of the most hostile places and people say, because you're not offensive. You know more about us than we know about ourselves, and you're willing to come here and engage with ideas. I don't convert, Christ converts. But in order to get in, I have to move. I have to merge that truth. I have to overcome the lies. I have to vocalize the morality. And I have to engage in ideas. And I have to constantly hammer at this. So let me close with a poem that was written by Isaac Watts. It's based on the 2nd Psalm. Why do the nations join to slay the Lord's anointed Son? Why do they cast his laws away and tread his gospel down? The Lord who reigns above the sky derides their rage below and speaks with vengeance in his eyes and casts their spirits through. I call him my eternal Son and raised him from the dead. I made my holy hill his throne and wide his kingdom spread. Be wise, ye rulers of the earth. Obey the anointed Lord. Adore the King of heavenly birth and tremble at his word. With humble love address his throne, for if he frown ye die, those are secure and those alone who on his grace rely.